The air in the courtroom hung heavy, thick with unspoken tension, as Isabella Rossi stood before Judge Frank Caprio. Her posture exuded an almost casual defiance, a smirk playing on her lips, as if this entire proceeding were an amusing inconvenience rather than a serious matter. She'd been cited for a litany of infractions, multiple serious parking violations, the kind that accumulate like bad habits, and reckless driving charges that painted a clear picture of disregard for public safety. Yet she looked utterly unconcerned, radiating an aura of untouchable confidence. Judge Caprio, a man known throughout Providence for his unwavering calm, his gentle demeanor masking an iron will, peered over his glasses. His voice, though soft, carried an undeniable authority. "Miss Rossi," he began, "why do you believe you are above the law?" Isabella's smirk widened. Her eyes, dark and flashing with an almost predatory glint, met his gaze without flinching. She raised her voice, letting it carry through the hushed courtroom, an overt challenge to the very institution she stood within. "You don't understand who I am." Her tone dripped with an almost theatrical disdain. "My father owns this city. You can't touch me." She emphasized the phrase "owns this city" with a sneer, a deliberate, calculated insinuation of her father's deep-seated, well-known connections to the criminal underworld, a veiled threat delivered with chilling precision. The courtroom held its breath, expecting an outburst, a reprimand, perhaps even a show of fear from the venerable judge. But Judge Caprio did not react with anger. He did not flinch. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. A slight, almost imperceptible nod of his head, the only acknowledgement of her provocative statement. His response, when it came, was delivered with a quiet strength that belied its brevity. "Is that so? We'll see about that." His calm, almost dismissive tone had an unexpected effect. It made Isabella pause, her confident facade faltering, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. Her challenge, designed to intimidate, had met an unyielding wall of composure. Without another word, Judge Caprio reached for a pen. He didn't yell. He didn't make a grand, theatrical show. He simply picked up the pen, its glint catching the fluorescent lights of the courtroom, and began to write on a document laid out before him. The only sound in the room was the soft scratch of the pen on paper, a mundane act that somehow amplified the tension. The focus of the room shifted, drawn to the rhythmic movement of his hand, but the contents of what he wrote remained a mystery, a silent, unfolding consequence. Isabella's smirk, which had only just begun to reassert itself, faltered completely, replaced by a nascent unease. A voiceover, detached and resonant, delivered a profound truth. Some people think power means you can do anything. They forget that true power respects the rules, not breaks them. Isabella remained standing, but her earlier bravado had visibly dissipated. Her eyes darted from the judge to her father's lawyer, who suddenly looked profoundly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, his gaze fixed on the table before him. The judge finished writing, placed the pen down with a soft click, and then, with deliberate slowness, pushed the document across to his clerk. The clerk, a young woman with wide, serious eyes, picked it up, glanced at it, and then at Isabella, a silent message passing between them. A cold dread began to creep through Isabella. She had a very bad feeling about this. Before we go on, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Providence, Rhode Island, was more than just a dot on a map. It was a character in itself, a city steeped in a rich tapestry of Italian-American heritage. Growing up there meant understanding a certain rhythm of life, a specific way of doing things. It was a place defined by its tight-knit communities, where the aroma of garlic and simmering tomato sauce perpetually hung in the air, a place where family was everything, and respect was earned, not given. My own family embodied this spirit. We were hard-working, honest immigrants who had built a life from scratch, running a small, respected bakery in Federal Hill. Our days were filled with the scent of fresh bread and the clatter of baking sheets, our evenings with stories and laughter around the dinner table. We believed in the simple virtues: community, hard work, and respecting our elders. And among those elders, Judge Caprio stood tall, a figure of fairness and firmness, a pillar of the community, long before his face graced television screens. He was a man who understood the soul of Providence. But not all families in Providence shared these values, at least not in the same way. Then there was the Rossi family. They were different. Isabella's father, Marco Rossi, known ominously as the Hammer, was a prominent figure, his name whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence. He had money, influence, and a reputation that preceded him, a reputation that subtly, yet undeniably, carried the scent of the Mafia. Everyone knew Marco Rossi, but not always for reasons one would boast about in polite company. Isabella, as a result, grew up with everything money could buy and influence could secure. From expensive designer clothes and the latest luxury cars to never having to wait in line at the best restaurants, her life was a testament to unchecked privilege. She was, by all accounts, thoroughly spoiled, accustomed to getting her way, her path through life meticulously cleared by her father's power. Consequences seemed to be a concept that simply did not apply to her. This upbringing fostered an arrogance that clashed starkly with the working-class values and quiet dignity that most of Providence held dear. Her behavior was a constant, jarring discord in the city's melody. Early tensions were not hard to recall. I remember small incidents, almost unremarkable in their frequency. Isabella cutting in line at the bakery, her impatient tapping echoing through the usually serene space, demanding to be served first. Moments later, I'd see her yelling at a bewildered waiter at a local trattoria because her food wasn't exactly to her liking, oblivious to the discomfort she caused. She seemed to glide through life, impervious to the small infractions, the minor rudenesses, simply because her last name was Rossi. These were the early, clear signals that she genuinely believed she was above the rules that governed everyone else. My parents, like many others, would shake their heads, a familiar sigh escaping their lips. "That girl is going to learn the hard way one day," my mother would often lament, a prophetic tone in her voice. Judge Caprio, meanwhile, continued to solidify his reputation. Long before his court show brought him national fame, he was a local legend. He was the judge who treated everyone with the same measured respect, whether they were the mayor of Providence or a humble mechanic from the East Side. He possessed a quiet strength, an unshakable moral compass that made even powerful individuals think twice before attempting to bend the rules in his courtroom. He was the embodiment of justice in a city that often felt like it operated on a different set of laws. He was the immovable object to Isabella's irresistible force, though at the time, neither of them knew their paths were on a collision course. The friction between Isabella's entitled behavior and the deeply ingrained community values of Providence grew steadily, like a slow-burning fuse. It wasn't a direct confrontation with the narrator or their family, but rather a metaphorical deterioration of her relationship with the very fabric of the city. Her antics weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern, a series of humiliations and broken promises that chipped away at the collective patience of the community. One particularly recurring issue was her flagrant disregard for parking laws, especially around the small businesses that form the backbone of Federal Hill. Isabella frequently parked her gleaming, expensive cars illegally, often blocking access for delivery trucks, or, even worse, taking up handicapped spaces right in front of storefronts. When confronted by a small shop owner, a man who had poured his life savings into his modest establishment, she wouldn't apologize or move. Instead, she would fix him with a cold stare, her voice dripping with condescension, and ask, "Do you know who my father is?" The shop owner, a decent, hard-working immigrant, would simply sigh, a weary resignation settling over his features. He knew, as everyone did, that any official complaint would likely vanish into thin air, handled by unseen hands. Then there was the notorious restaurant scene. It happened at a beloved Italian eatery, a place where families celebrated milestones and friends gathered for boisterous meals. Isabella, arriving late for her reservation, threw a spectacular tantrum because her table wasn't ready precisely on time. Her voice, shrill and demanding, cut through the warm hum of conversation, making other patrons visibly uncomfortable. She berated the maitre d', threatened the owner with vague but menacing hints about her father's connections, and ultimately stormed out, leaving a trail of shattered peace and an unspoken understanding that no one would dare cross her. The owner, a proud man, simply cleaned up the mess, his face a mask of quiet fury. Another incident, recounted in hushed tones, involved a local police officer who had the audacity to pull her over for speeding down a residential street. Isabella, rather than accepting responsibility, immediately pulled out her phone and called her father. Within minutes, the officer, a man known for his integrity, was seen looking utterly deflated, his shoulders slumped. The ticket, everyone surmised, had been handled. It was a stark reminder that even the guardians of the law seemed powerless against the shadow of Marco Rossi. Isabella's behavior wasn't merely rude. It often had small, yet cumulatively damaging impacts on others. She would leave a chaotic mess at public events, damage property with her reckless driving, or cut people off in traffic with an almost gleeful disregard for their safety. Apologies were never offered, amends never made. For Isabella, the world was her stage, and everyone else was merely an extra, easily dismissed or trampled upon. The community, though often silent, seethed with frustration. People talked in whispers over coffee, in grocery store aisles, and behind closed doors. They were tired of Isabella's antics, her blatant disrespect, her constant assertion of superiority. Yet they felt a profound sense of helplessness. Marco Rossi's influence was a palpable force, a silent threat that hung over the city. No one, absolutely no one, wanted trouble with the hammer. They knew he had ways of making problems disappear, or, more terrifyingly, appear in unexpected and unpleasant forms. The cost of standing up to Isabella, of truly challenging her, seemed too high for most. The courtroom incident, the one that brought Isabella face to face with Judge Caprio, was not a sudden, isolated outburst. It was the natural, almost inevitable, culmination of years of Isabella believing she was utterly untouchable. Her arrogance had been consistently fueled by her father's ironclad protection and the community's reluctant, weary silence. My family, with their quiet wisdom, had seen this coming for years. "She's digging her own grave," my mother would often say, a somber prediction in her voice. "One day, someone won't care who her father is, and on that day, she'll finally learn." They just never imagined that someone would be Judge Caprio. The narrator, along with countless others in the community, felt a growing, simmering sense of injustice that had reached a boiling point. They knew, deep down, that Judge Caprio was different. He was the one person, it seemed, who was truly incorruptible in the intricate web of Providence's power dynamics. He was the beacon of hope for genuine accountability. With a quiet, almost unspoken determination, the community began to subtly gather evidence of Isabella's egregious and habitual misbehavior. This wasn't a coordinated, organized effort in the traditional sense, but rather a spontaneous, organic uprising of individual citizens who had simply had enough. Shop owners, tired of her contemptuous dismissals, started discreetly taking photos of her illegally parked luxury car, time-stamping them, and noting the specific violations. Waiters, weary of her public tantrums and veiled threats, began to keep mental notes, sometimes even jotting down the dates and details of her outbursts on the back of order pads. People, once resigned to silence, now kept meticulous mental records of her public displays of entitlement, her rude comments, and her casual disregard for the rules that bound everyone else. The frustration, once a silent, communal burden, was slowly transforming into a quiet, collective resolve. The judge's reputation, meanwhile, preceded him. He was known for his meticulousness, his unwavering commitment to due process. He always read every detail, every report, every complaint, no matter how minor it seemed on the surface. He prided himself on absolute fairness, but also on holding every single person accountable for their actions, without exception. Crucially, he was a man who would not, under any circumstances, bend to pressure, whether it came from powerful politicians or notorious figures like Marco the Hammer Rossi. His integrity was his shield, and his commitment to the law his sword. The subtle actions of the community, born from years of pent-up frustration, slowly started to funnel towards the court. People who had previously been dismissed by indifferent police officers or intimidated by lawyers connected to the Rossi family now found a surprisingly sympathetic ear in Judge Caprio's office staff. These dedicated individuals, attuned to the judge's unwavering commitment to justice, understood that even the smallest complaint could hold significant weight if properly documented. They weren't directly conspiring against Isabella, but the ground was being carefully and meticulously laid for a reckoning. Each photograph, each witness account, each frustrated sigh from a shop owner was a brick in the wall of evidence that was slowly being built. The system, once seemingly impenetrable to the average citizen, was now, through its most scrupulous guardian, beginning to listen. The catalyst that finally brought Isabella directly before Judge Caprio was a particularly egregious incident, one that crossed a line even for her. She had, not once but multiple times, parked her expensive vehicle in a designated handicapped spot in front of a busy supermarket. When confronted by a disabled person, a man struggling with crutches who desperately needed the spot, Isabella didn't just dismiss him, she verbally abused him, shouting insults and, true to form, dropping her father's name as a veiled threat. This time, however, the complaint wasn't dismissed. The supermarket manager, a man with a disabled sister, was incensed enough to personally ensure the complaint landed directly on Judge Caprio's desk, bypassing the usual channels where such matters might mysteriously disappear. Isabella, completely oblivious to the gathering storm, continued to live her lavish, careless life. She was utterly unaware that the tide was turning, that the seemingly insurmountable wall of her father's influence was beginning to show cracks. She genuinely believed that Marco Rossi's power would always shield her, that she was truly untouchable. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, away from the public eye, Judge Caprio was quietly, methodically, and meticulously reviewing a thick file that had accumulated over the years. It was a dossier of complaints, police reports, witness statements, and photographic evidence, all meticulously connected to Isabella Rossi. He wasn't just preparing for a simple parking ticket hearing. He was building a comprehensive case, not merely for a few minor infractions, but for a deeply ingrained pattern of arrogant, lawless behavior. The stage was set, and Isabella was about to learn that in Judge Caprio's courtroom, true power belonged only to the law. We return now to that tense courtroom, the air thick with unspoken expectations. Isabella Rossi, her smirk still firmly in place, had just uttered those defiant words to Judge Caprio. "My father owns this city. You can't touch me." Judge Caprio, known for his unshakable calm, met her gaze. He nodded slowly, a deliberate, almost imperceptible gesture that held more weight than any shout. "Miss Rossi," he began, his voice even and measured, "I understand you believe your family has significant influence, but I must inform you that in this courtroom, the only thing that matters is the law. And in this courtroom, the law applies equally to everyone." His words hung in the air, a stark contrast to Isabella's earlier bluster. He then turned to his clerk, a quiet signal passing between them. "Mr. Henderson," the judge stated, "if you would be so kind as to project the evidence." The courtroom lights dimmed slightly, and a large screen behind the judge's bench flickered to life. Isabella, still confident, leaned back, expecting perhaps a single photo of her illegally parked car. What appeared on the screen, however, was not just a single image, but a relentless, damning slideshow. The first image was her gleaming luxury SUV, brazenly occupying a handicapped parking spot, its tires precisely over the painted blue lines. Then another and another, from different dates, different locations across Providence, each photo meticulously time-stamped and geotagged. The camera zoomed in on the handicapped placards she had so carelessly ignored, the universal symbol of accessibility mocked by her entitlement. The slideshow continued, each image a fresh stab at her diminishing arrogance. There were photos of her vehicle blocking fire hydrants, creating hazards for emergency services. Pictures of her double-parked on busy streets, snarling traffic, and inconveniencing countless commuters. Then the images shifted. Close-up shots of her face, contorted in anger, yelling at a small shopkeeper who was bravely attempting to confront her for blocking his delivery entrance. Another showed her in a fancy restaurant, pointing an accusatory finger at a visibly distressed waiter. The most damning evidence, however, came in the form of official documents. A police report, not for an arrest, but a detailed account of a minor fender bender, where Isabella was clearly at fault, but the charges had inexplicably vanished. Then, witness statements, compiled quietly, over months, even years, from ordinary citizens. The disabled man she had verbally abused, the exasperated bakery owner, the restaurant manager, the police officer who had been forced to let her go. These weren't just complaints, they were sworn affidavits, each detailing a specific instance of her blatant disregard for decency and law. The community's quiet documentation, their suppressed frustrations, had now become undeniable, irrefutable evidence projected for all to see. Judge Caprio, without a trace of anger, began to detail every single violation. "Miss Rossi," he intoned, his voice resonating with authority, "on October 12th, you parked in a designated handicapped space outside the Federal Hill Market. On November 3rd, you blocked a fire lane on Elmwood Avenue. On December 19th, you were cited for reckless driving near the Providence College campus, a complaint that was inexplicably dismissed. On January 7th, you verbally assaulted Mr. Antonio Moretti, owner of Moretti's Bakery, for confronting you about blocking his delivery zone. On February 22nd, he continued listing dates, locations, and the precise nature of each offense, not just the current parking tickets, but dozens of others that had been handled or simply ignored over the years. He explained with chilling precision that her behavior was not an isolated incident, but a deeply ingrained pattern, demonstrating a complete and utter disregard for the law, the safety of others, and the well-being of her community. Isabella's face, once a picture of smug confidence, drained of all color. Her carefully constructed smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a raw, unadulterated expression of genuine fear and disbelief. She darted a glance at her father's lawyer, who sat beside her, visibly sweating, shrinking lower and lower in his expensive suit. He knew, with a sinking certainty, that this was no longer just about a few parking tickets. This was a public dissection of Isabella Rossi's entire entitled existence. Judge Caprio then delivered his verdict, his voice rising slightly, but still controlled. Given the overwhelming evidence of habitual and egregious violations, Miss Rossi, and your demonstrated contempt for the rule of law and the citizens of Providence, I am imposing the maximum possible fines for every single accumulated violation. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. That amounts to a sum that will undoubtedly impact your considerable resources. He wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am ordering you to perform 500 hours of community service, specifically in areas where your past actions have caused the most disruption. Your driving privileges are hereby suspended for a period of no less than 2 years. And, most importantly, his gaze sharpened, fixing Isabella directly, you are to issue a public, written apology to Mr. David Miller, the disabled gentleman you abused, and to the owners of Moretti's Bakery, the Federal Hill Market, and the Italian Kitchen Restaurant, all to be published in the Providence Journal and approved by this court. Failure to comply with any part of this sentence will result in an immediate warrant for your arrest and a minimum of 6 months in state prison. Isabella, finally finding her voice, tried to protest, to invoke her father's name one last time, a desperate, whimpering attempt to reclaim her lost power. But Judge Caprio cut her off, his voice now firm, authoritative. Miss Rossi, he declared, his eyes unwavering, your father does not own this courtroom, and he does not own the law. You are, unequivocally, accountable for your actions. This city may have its issues, but it also has rules, and everyone, absolutely everyone, including you, must follow them. The look on her face was pure, unadulterated regret and profound humiliation. The transformation was complete. The gavel struck, a sound that reverberated through the stunned courtroom, sealing Isabella's fate. The immediate consequences were staggering. She was indeed forced to pay the massive fines, a sum so considerable it significantly impacted her family's visible wealth. The luxury car, once a symbol of her untouchable status, was sold to cover a portion of the debt, a bitter pill for a woman who had never known financial constraint. Her designer wardrobe, once a source of endless pride, began to seem ostentatious and out of place as her public image plummeted. The community service was perhaps the crueler, yet more effective part of her sentence. Judge Caprio, with his characteristic precision, had ensured she was placed in areas where she was not only recognizable, but forced to confront the very people she had disrespected. She spent hours cleaning graffiti from public parks, many of which she had once sped through without a second glance. She worked in soup kitchens, serving meals to those less fortunate, often finding herself face to face with individuals she had previously dismissed or ignored. The ultimate humiliation came when she was assigned to assist at a local community center, directly across the street from Moretti's bakery, the very establishment whose owner she had once verbally abused. Each day, she walked past Mr. Moretti, his silent gaze a constant reminder of her past arrogance. Her public apology, meticulously crafted and approved by the court, was printed in the Providence Journal, a stark admission of guilt and regret that burned hotter than any fine. Her driving privileges, once taken for granted, were revoked for a full 2 years, forcing the once fiercely independent Isabella to rely on public transportation or the kindness of others, a dependency that chipped away at her self-importance with every ride. Her father's vast influence, for all its whispered power, proved utterly incapable of undoing the judge's ironclad ruling. Marco Rossi, though hammer, was indeed furious. The public humiliation of his daughter was a direct blow to his carefully cultivated image of control and impunity. He paced his opulent office, his face a mask of barely contained rage. He had made calls, pulled strings, but each time he hit a wall. Judge Caprio's ruling was not only legally sound but had garnered overwhelming public support. The citizens of Providence, long tired of the Rossi family's perceived immunity, saw Caprio as a hero. Any attempt to retaliate against the judge, or even subtly undermine his authority, would backfire spectacularly, risking not just his daughter's freedom, but the entire delicate balance of his operations. He was forced to swallow his pride, to accept his daughter's public humiliation, and to acknowledge for the first time that there were limits to his power. For the narrator, and indeed for the entire community, there was a profound sense of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge. It was about the profound, almost spiritual, triumph of justice. The incident served as a powerful, tangible reminder that no one, absolutely no one, was truly above the law, especially not in a city like Providence, where community values, though sometimes strained, still held significant weight. The faith in the system, which had been eroding for years under the weight of perceived corruption and influence, felt profoundly renewed. The narrator often reflected on the true meaning of dignity, respect, and accountability. Isabella's downfall was a direct consequence of her unchecked arrogance, a lifetime of believing she was exempt from the rules that governed everyone else. Judge Caprio, through his unwavering calm and methodical application of the law, had not sought to punish out of malice, but to teach a lesson that reverberated far beyond the confines of his courtroom. He had shown that true power did not lie in breaking rules or intimidating others, but in the unwavering commitment to upholding justice, in treating every individual with respect, and in ensuring that the scales of law remained balanced. The story found its satisfying closure in the mundane. Isabella, no longer the arrogant, entitled princess, was often seen quietly going about her community service, her shoulders slightly stooped, her eyes no longer flashing with defiance but with a newfound, if reluctant, humility. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by practical work attire. There was no more sneering, no more name-dropping. The narrator, observing this transformation from a distance, would often nod subtly, a silent acknowledgement of the shift. In Providence, they had learned that day that no matter who your father was, or how much money he had amassed, you simply could not own justice. And sometimes, in the quiet, historic corridors of its courthouse, the quietest judges made the loudest, most unforgettable statements.